Hello everybody. Going to wait just a moment here and see if the live stream comes up like it's supposed to. So I hadn't made a video for a while, and the last live stream that I did was with TVOR and Reverend 20 Piece, so I thought I'd get on here and just kind of ramble on frankly about a few different things. Really, a lot of stuff has been going on lately, from the virus to all the political machinations that's going on, and after this election, and the media lying to people on a regular basis. Really, I guess nothing new. But I wanted to cover a few ideas that I've been mulling over for the past few weeks. One thing that I probably should have made a video about a long time ago, or in the past at least, that I don't think I've discussed before, is sort of what I learned about modern relationships kind of after I first discovered the men's community, and right after or right as I became red-pilled, so to speak, when it comes to men's issues in terms of relationships and otherwise. And that is, there's a little test that you can put people through, women in particular. And I don't recommend that people do this, because it was really a bad idea for me to kind of challenge women in this way. But again, I really didn't know enough. This was right around 2014, 2015, 2016, when I first sort of started figuring this information out. When I first started to become aware of how things really stand today for men in relationships. And so I didn't realize how reckless this was. I didn't realize that, you could really just have negative consequences for this. But if you ask women in general, your everyday average women out there, what is it that you bring to the table? What is it that women in general bring to the table that could make it worthwhile for a man to be in a relationship? What is it that, what incentive is there for men to participate in conventional relationships when men are expected to invest so much into a long-term relationship, but women do very little for men today? When you challenge women, or if you do, and I don't suggest that you actually confront or try to discuss this with most women out there, the response that you get is not typically what you'd expect if women actually had something to offer in general in a relationship with a man. What you'd expect if your average woman out there had something positive to offer, what she would do is say, well, okay, I realize that men want something out of their investment, and this is what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to cook on a daily basis. I'm willing to take care of the home on a regular basis. I'm willing to make a certain money myself, so I'm not going to rely on the man to pay for my bills, or I'm not going to rely on the man to take care of me, or you could have sort of an alternative view of everything's going to be 50-50. Everything's going to be split down the middle, so I'm willing to do half of all these things that the man does, which those relationships are dysfunctional. The actual end result of what the woman is telling you is different from what I'm saying her response would be if she was actually serious about bringing something to the table. I'm not saying that you should trust women even when they do say these things to actually deliver, because there's nothing in our society that really encourages women to hold up this end of the bargain. But nonetheless, if somebody was willing to bring something to the table, you'd expect that kind of response, right? That this is what I'm willing to do. I recognize the value that men bring, and here's what I do to sort of reciprocate, or here's what I do to sort of bounce that out. That's not the response that you get from the vast majority of women if you say, why should a man be in a relationship if women don't do anything in relationships anymore? What you get the vast majority of the time is basically a variation of two, well, basically a variation of one type of response. Either she says, how dare you? How dare you expect anything from a woman, right? How dare you expect her to do anything for you? Who do you think you are? Or the response that you get instead is, well, what do you bring to the table, right? Well, you say you want something from a woman. Well, what are you going to do for that relationship? And the thing about it is, men know that they can't get away with giving that kind of response. Men know what's up from the standpoint of, if you said, well, I'm the prize, or I'm the table, I don't need to bring anything to the table because I am the table, and I'm just such a great guy that any woman should want to invest in me. No man is going to be able to say that without getting laughed at. Like, it's just clear that no man would be able to get away with that sort of perspective, that sort of mindset. But because our society is so much about catering to women, women believe this. They think that they're the table. They think they don't need to bring anything that's equivalent to or even close to being advantageous for the man. And again, the vast majority of women, what they're trying to do, and in a broader context, guys, this is really what a lot of what feminism tries to do, and a lot of what women try to do in general, is they don't want men to understand that the vast majority of what they bring to the table is just sex. They don't want men to figure out, wait a second, I can get sex outside of a relationship, and that's all you bring to the table, so why would that be something that's worthwhile for me? Why should I as a man want to invest in that? When, again, once men figure out a lot of the other stuff too, your kids can be taken away in general at any time. You're risking false accusations. If you live with a woman, she can basically control the house because she can call the cops and have you kicked out through the Duluth model, which is the operating model for domestic violence in the West. When you figure out that there are all these other risks, and that all women really bring to the table is their sexuality, and they don't even attempt to say that they have anything else. Again, that's the whole point. They don't even say, well, here's what I'm willing to do for the man that I'm in a relationship with, or I'm already in a relationship and here's what I do for my husband or my boyfriend. Very rarely do women even say that. They don't even try. All they do is they deflect back onto you what they think you should bring to the table instead. They try to put you on the defensive so that you don't figure out that the majority of women out there are not willing to do anything for you. They're not willing to do the things that women used to do in relationships. They still expect you to make a certain amount of money. They still expect you as the man to be a provider and be a protector, but they're not willing to offer anything. And rather than just coming out and saying that, they have to deflect and act like you as the man are the one with the problem for even asking the question of, what do I get in return for my investment? And so again, I don't recommend that you go out and try to quiz women on this and try to see what their response is, but just based on when I did do this in the past, somewhat recklessly, and I say it's reckless because you're not going to get a positive outcome. They're just going to get pissed off at you for the most part, because they know that, like, they are basically of the mindset that you're not allowed to expect anything from them, so you're not even supposed to ask that question. But like I say, if your average woman out there offered something in a relationship, the response that you would get is, here's what I do for my man. Here's what I bring to the table if I would be in a relationship. And some of it, it's not always just tangible stuff. Some of it is, well, here's what I bring to the table from the standpoint of, I'm loyal. Or, if the relationship doesn't work, then I don't expect the man to commit to that. You don't see any brand of that. There's no version of, even trying to pretend that they actually bring something to the table other than sex. right? Or they may say that well, we control having children, but like I say, your children can be taken away from you by the state if you're a guy, through the woman. She basically, she controls the family structure. So again, when you confront women with all these facts, and like I say, I don't recommend wasting your time on this. You're not going to get a positive outcome. They will deflect. They will say, well, you're the one with the problem as the man for even expecting anything in return on your investment. And right away, you know damn well that what that means is they have nothing positive to offer. But they don't want men to figure that out. They want men to stay on the defensive and try to say, well, I think I deserve a woman that's this and that, and then they can tear you down on that basis by saying you just don't deserve that. But when you realize what's going on and you see that not only is it a waste of time, like I say, to really confront women in this type of way, on these issues, but when they don't even pretend to have an argument that says, well, this is what I bring to the table. This is what I've been willing to do with my past partners, whether or not the relationship actually worked out. It's not about any of that. It's just, what do you do for me and how dare you? And that to me is something that definitively confirms that they don't have anything positive to bring to the table, right? Otherwise, that's not what you would get as a response. You would get the response of, well, here's what I actually bring to the table, other than sex and my sexuality. So that's something I've noticed, that it really confirms this idea that most women are not willing to invest in a relationship with a man, because you wouldn't have that kind of response if they were willing to do that. So again, that's one of the points that I wanted to make in this live stream is I hope that I know this is a Monday night, so I might have sort of a low number of viewers, at least to start off with, but I hope that the video is actually, I know it's lagging to some extent, but I hope that it's actually getting out there for people to see. The internet connection here, I think, is just too slow for it to be consistently a good connection, evidently. I'm pretty close to the router, so I hope that the audio is at least getting through on this. But like I say, that was the first main point that I wanted to make, is that you can test this out. I don't recommend that you do this because you're going to get flack for it, but you can see that, okay, if the idea of even doing anything for a man in a relationship basically offends you, and you're just going to say, well, no, the man needs to bring something to the table. What do you bring? Who are you to think that a woman should have something to offer you? When that's the response that you get, that confirms that the vast majority of women, which again, my argument is the majority of women do respond in this way, that they don't offer anything that's positive, that's worth investing in. For the women that do say, well, here's what I actually have to offer, maybe at least they're aware that they need to try to bring something to the table or pretend that it's about more than just sex for resources. But most women don't even get to that point. They don't even pretend. They just have this entitled view toward men. And that, of course, that's not acceptable for a man that's aware of all this. There's no reason to engage in that type of relationship. But just that effort to make you go on the defensive and to deflect your sort of skepticism about whether women have something to offer in a relationship, just their attempt to deflect that and try to put you on the defensive rather than to say, well, here's what I offer, that shows you that they don't have anything to offer in the first place when it comes to the majority of women in this culture. Again, you can get into the questions of, well, what is actually a fair relationship if you're going to be in one, in this climate of, female domination, of female centrism. But most women don't even get to the point where they're pretending to offer anything other than sex, and that should say a lot in itself, in my view. Like I say, I noticed that when I first started digesting a lot of this information in the men's community, but at that point, I was actually trying to get women to see the light, or people in general to be red-pilled, and that was kind of naive to some extent. But at this point, like I say, you can just look back and see how women are. Like, they don't even try to offer anything other than their sexuality. And that tells you right away where things stand in terms of that between men and women today. I'm going to have a drink of coffee here. Maybe several drinks. So the second topic that I wanted to talk about is something that is a little bit less concise, I guess, a little bit less specific, but just the general kind of gap between conservatives, or not really conservatives, but people on the right versus leftists today. I think a lot of people just assumed, regardless of their political stance, they just assumed that with Trump out of office that things would go back to so-called normal in terms of our kind of political atmosphere. And I that's not going to happen. I don't see that. I don't see it working out that way at all. The divide between the left and the right is just growing greater and greater. It's just this huge chasm now that I don't think can ever be bridged. It used to be, even just several years ago, maybe 8-10 years ago, and it's been getting worse over time, but it used to be that even though there were major disagreements, major points of disagreement, huge ideological differences between liberals and conservatives, the left and the right, it used to be that there was some context for compromise, or some context for, okay, as an example, a liberal may care about poor people in the economy. They want to help poor people, and they support more welfare programs, let's say. And someone that's on the right, a conservative, may say, well, I care about the economic health of my country, and I care about sort of a pro-business perspective of, we want to be able to run things in a way so that the economy can be healthy over a long period of time, so we can see growth and more wealth in general. But you could get together and say, well, I may oppose your welfare programs and I may oppose your pro-business view, but at least we both care about the economy. We both care about things running well. We may have a different view on what exactly that takes, but we can compromise and say, hey, the economy needs poorer people to do somewhat well. We don't want people to be completely impoverished to the point where they can't stay in their home, or they can't put food on the table. And then your liberals could say, well, if the economy in general is not healthy and there's no wealth and there's no growth, then there's going to be more poor people, so we don't support that either. Now, to some extent, I'm being a little bit idealistic here, but I think that sort of context used to exist, not even that long ago, where there were major ideological disagreements between the right and the left, but at least there was some sort of common goal or common sort of desire to see things work. Now, and I blame the media for this changing, and I'm going to get to that in just a second, but now it's like the gap between the left and the right is so different that you have completely different narratives, completely different points of view that are totally incompatible with one another. And again, I'm not saying that I don't pick a side. I'm closer to the right than I am the left. I will say that I'm right of center, even though I'm more libertarian in a lot of my views. I definitely don't agree with what the left is doing, but this gap, this gulf between the right and the left is so huge that I don't see any sort of agreement that's possible on hardly anything. There's the narrative, and then there's the anti-narrative, and like I say, it's the mainstream media, or the point that I really wanted to get to here is that it's the mainstream media that has caused most of this, in my view, or at least they're the number one factor. What's happened is the media has gotten so dogmatic in their leftist ideology and point of view that you have basically two groups of people now. You have the group of people that just watch TV, they watch CNN, they watch ABC News, CBS News, CSNBC, MSNBC is their news network, I think. They watch all these different mainstream outlets, and even Fox News, since they've been bought by Disney, I've heard that they've moved further to the left as well. It's so bad that you basically have the people that realize that they're being lied to on a daily basis by the media. They realize how not unobjective the media has become, that they believe that everything that they hear is a lie from the media, and then you have the people that just believe everything that CNN tells them. And so the narrative itself, the set of facts that you work with itself, are so different from the right versus the left that I don't think that they can ever be reconciled. I think it's going to continue to get worse. And I want to go into a few more details on that. Like, you look for example, even this 2016 election. I saw a headline for an article. I didn't actually click on it because I knew it was going to be bullshit. That said, there are millions of people in the United States that believe Trump won. And it said something, like, how are people this stupid? How are people this unaware of the facts? And it's like, well, the reason is because the media lies to them about everything. The media in general, the mainstream media, is so hostile toward anything that's not the leftist point of view that people that don't share in that ideological nonsense, they just assume they're being lied to. They know that the media lies to them every day about all kinds of stuff, and they just assume that if the media tells them that you must think that Biden won the election, they just assume that he really didn't win. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. And again, I don't want to get into the whole evidence of fraud discussion. A lot of people seem to disagree with me on that. I do think there's some evidence of fraud, but that I don't think that, like, from the beginning, like, the election night was the beginning of the end for the Trump presidency. Once the next day happened and it looked like Biden had won in certain states like Georgia and Pennsylvania, I knew it was going to be very, very difficult for Trump to overturn the election results. And things have kind of progressed the way that I thought they would from that point. But nonetheless, whether you agree with me about the level of fraud and all that, a big part of why people think that Biden didn't really win and they don't trust that is because of the level of distrust that the media has cultivated ever since Trump became president, at least for that long. And really, it's been going on since before that, where the media is just so hostile toward any point of view other than the leftist narrative that it wants to sell and insists that people go along with, that people just assume that they gravitate towards something else. They know the media is lying to them, and they become, part of the Trump camp, or they just, they look at conservative media, alt media outlets, or they just, they find their own sort of thing that they believe in. And what's happening is, as this becomes more and more extreme, the gulf between the left and the right becomes greater and greater. And what I see happening is there's very few people left in between. People are either getting swept up one way or the other. You have your people, like I say, that aren't really leftists. They're not really, they don't have any clue what's going on in some cases politically in this country today. But they believe whatever the media tells them, the mainstream media outlets, and so they, in essence, become leftists. They get swept up in the leftist way of thinking. You can see it with the C virus, and I don't really want to highlight the coronavirus in this live stream. I may talk about it a little bit at the end, but I'm getting kind of worn out from talking about that. Although I do still have opinions, of course, on what's going on now. But you see, even with something like that, where the media insists that everybody must wear a mask, right? Everybody needs to stay home because that'll magically cure the virus somehow. And then when the numbers are still out of control, it's because of this 10% of people that refuse to wear a mask. That's clearly why the numbers are still so high. No, it's because we don't have a freaking cure and it's contagious. That's why the numbers are high. But like I say, I don't want to get into that very much here. But just with something like the coronavirus, you have the people that believe everything the media is telling them about it, even if these people aren't consciously leftists. They're not consciously liberals, but yet they gravitate toward that pro-government, individuals shouldn't be allowed to decide anything for themselves, everybody needs to wear a mask everywhere type of thinking, because they're leftists. They become leftists through that process. And then you have people on the other side who just, they believe that the media is lying to them all the time, and they're probably right, and so they just think the whole thing is a pandemic. They think the whole thing is fake, it's a big hoax, and so forth. Now, those are two extreme positions, but there really are very few people that are right in the middle. Like, the gap between one side or the other, this big gulf, like I say, between the right and the left, the narrative, the two narratives are just not compatible. Like, there's no way to compromise on the coronavirus is the worst thing ever versus the coronavirus is a hoax and it's a pandemic. Like, there's no compromise whatsoever that's possible between those types of positions. And so, again, I'm not saying that I'm completely neutral with all this, but I am in the middle in the sense that I think for myself, or I try to. I'm not saying that I'm so much smarter than everybody else or anything like that, but most people are not capable of doing that. They get swept up in one side or the other. They get swept up either in the leftist media or in the pro-Trump camp. They get swept up into thinking that one story, one narrative is true or the other, and they don't really assess the situation. They don't really do their own sort of attempt to analyze things. They just either believe in the narrative or they believe in the anti-narrative, as far as what the leftist media tells you. They either think the media is telling them the truth or they just believe the opposite. And none of this is really good. Like, the healthy situation would be if people actually did their own thinking and just, were reasonable about something like this virus. And again, my position is it's real, but the response that we're getting from this, from the government and from our society, is ridiculous. That's basically my position on it. But even if you disagree with that or whatnot, people are either getting swept up one way or the other. There are very few people that are in between, and I don't know what all this is going to lead to in the midterm. In the short run, I think that the gap between the left and the right is just going to continue to get bigger. And it's already, I think, to a point where there's really no compatibility between the leftist narrative and the conservative or the right-wing narrative. I will say this, and this is kind of what I want to wrap this point up on, or this topic up on. As I've thought about this topic, I've become more convinced that in the United States, there's going to be somebody that tries to fill Trump's shoes. There's going to be somebody that steps up within the next few years, probably. It may not happen for a few years, but there's going to be somebody that tries to do what Trump did. Trump may try to run again in 2024. he's going to be almost 80 years old by that point. I don't think that he can win again, to be honest. And again, people may disagree with that, but I think somebody else will come along who's probably younger, who also has sort of a charismatic personality, who will try to do what Trump did. And he will be the focal point of that anti-narrative. He'll be the focal point, or it could be a she for that matter, probably a he, but who knows. That person will be the focal point of the media is lying to you, what you're being told is not true, and this leftist way of doing things is going to destroy this country, which all that stuff is true. But again, somebody else I think will probably be in the near future, or it may be a few years from now, the sort of focal point for people on the right, for conservatives who don't go along with what the mainstream media is doing, insisting that you have to have this leftist point of view on everything or you're stupid. I think somebody will step up and do that. Now, whether they can be successful, I'm pretty skeptical about. Maybe they can find a way to harness a lot of what Trump did, but not make themselves look so egotistical in that process. Maybe that's possible, maybe that's not. But like I say, I'm observing how people are reacting on both sides, and the gap between the right and the left is just growing larger and larger and larger, to a point where the narratives and the context is just not... there's no such thing as compromise. To put it another way, someone on the right, your typical conservative / right-winger, so not necessarily center-right, but, just kind of if there is such a thing, your average Trump supporter, let's say, the average person that voted for Trump and voted for a Republican ticket, versus your average person that voted for Biden, or that's, is part of the political left. Those people cannot have a conversation about politics together and reach any sort of agreement about what's going on. Or the conversation itself would just quickly devolve between your average Trump supporter and your average Biden supporter. The conversation would just devolve into F you don't know what's going on, basically just a hostile type of confrontation, because there's just no compatibility there. There is no, hey, we strongly disagree, but here's kind of a common goal, or here's what we can compromise on. I don't think you can do that the way things are now. And I'm sure that as things go along and get worse, that you're not going to be able to do that. The gap between the right and the left is so huge now, the chasm is so wide, that it's just a matter of whether you believe in the narrative or the anti-narrative. Do you believe what the media is telling you, or do you believe everything they say is full of crap and you believe the opposite of that, basically? There are very few people, such as myself, and again, I'm not trying to say I'm so smart or to talk down on people. This is just kind of part of my personality. But there are very few people, such as myself, I think, who will stand in the middle, in the sense of, I don't have any sort of allegiance to one ideology. I'm not going to commit to the right or the left. I think it's all bullshit, basically. I don't trust any point of view. I'm skeptical about anything that I haven't evaluated myself. I look at things based on the evidence. There are very few people that are going to be able to continue to do that. I think for the most part, people are going to get swept up onto one side or the other. And it's going to be more and more extreme. And I think the left is winning. Overall, I'm not... My view on whether the right is going to be sustainable or is going to be able to compete in the future, I still... I'm not hopeful about that in some ways, but I do think that this split, this divide, politically, is getting worse and worse, and it's because of the mainstream media primarily. It's because people either believe whatever they hear on CNN, or they believe whatever Trump says. They either believe that The legacy media somehow is not biased, and they're under this delusion that they're being given objective information. And so, of course, they believe in the leftist narrative, the big government, pro-government narrative, or they think it's all bullshit, and they have the complete opposite point of view. I think that divide is going to continue to grow between those two types of positions. And to even try to have a conversation between conservatives and liberals today, I think is almost impossible, because there's just no way you can agree on some of the basic things that are going on. So, again, I'm not trying to say I'm completely neutral. I'm not. I voted for Trump in this last election. I generally side with the right more than I do the left, for sure, because I think the left is such a threat to Western society at this point. But again, I'm not dedicated toward one side or the other, but most people are. Most people are totally getting swept up, in my opinion, to one side or the other. And I think that this gap, this chasm between the left and the right politically is just going to continue to grow. And what ends up happening, I don't know. Like I say, I think somebody will step up and try to take Trump's place, or maybe not try to do it exactly like he did, but they're going to try to use those same tactics. They're going to try to appeal to the people that see how we're progressing, and they see how the left is in control of the mainstream media and all this. They're gonna try to rise up and unite those people again politically. But I don't know how much success that person will have. But I think this gap between rightists and leftists is going to continue to grow. I don't think there's any sort of reconciliation that's possible at this point. And like I say, I don't know what the end result's going to be. I think the left will probably grow stronger over time, but that's kind of a different topic. In the short run, I don't know what's going to happen, other than people are going to be more divided. And like I say, let me know what you guys' thoughts are on that. If you see this video later and want to make a comment on it. I haven't received any comments so far in this video. Might be because it's lagging so much, and it also might be because I just don't have too many people watching it right now that want to comment. But I just don't see any way for the left and the right to be brought back to any sort of discussion, because the narrative and the anti-narrative are so much different than one another now that people are so they're so caught up in it that, like I say, I don't think that we're going to heal in that fashion. I don't think that we're ever going to come back together in terms of the left and the right even being able to have a conversation again. I think one side's going to win and one side's going to lose, basically. And I don't know how it'll play out exactly, but I don't see any sort of bridging that gap at this point. So the last point that I wanted to make, or the last topic that I wanted to ramble on about is sort of related to the previous topic to some extent. And that's the idea of Balkanizing the United States. Balkanization. And what that involves, just to give sort of a brief definition for that, is you basically split up a region that is not, I guess the word to use would be homogeneous, that is not on the same page enough to actually stay united as one country. And of course the Balkans are an example of that, because you had, Bosnia and Serbia and all these different ethnic groups that couldn't really get along and form one country and stay together for any length of time. And so the idea of Balkanizing, or Balkanization as a term, is basically the idea of separating different regions of a country out when those regions are politically and culturally incompatible with one another. And Stardust primarily is the one that I've seen talk about this in terms of the United States. And I guess I kind of have a concern, or I think I see a flaw in some of the arguments that he was making, that Balkanization basically, and I'm not trying to single Stardust out, I'm sure other people have this idea as well, that balkanization would be the most rational option for the United States today. That certain regions of the country are so culturally and politically different from one another that the best way to proceed would be to say, okay, California and the West Coast can be its own country, and the Midwest needs to basically be a country, and then the more left-leaning New England states, you might take the upper Midwest, Minnesota and Michigan and Wisconsin, and that might be its own region, its own country, its own state. The idea is you try to break things up on political lines so that the whole thing doesn't collapse in on itself, so you can avoid something like a civil war in the long run because of the great regional differences within the United States in terms of politics and culture. The problem with that argument, and I can see why he and why other people would think this way, if you just look at a political map, oh, where are the blue states? Where are the red states? Maybe these areas need to have their own government. Maybe these areas need to break off. Maybe California should break off, and the New England states, as I mentioned, the Midwest. Maybe you could break things up along those lines if you just look at a map of where the red states are and where the blue states are. But there's a major flaw, a major problem in looking at things that way. And the problem or the flaw with that is the difference between conservative or liberal dominated states is not primarily the region where those states are located. The difference is urban versus rural domination. The states that have the big cities are dominated politically by those big cities, and they vote left, they vote blue, they vote Democratic. The areas that are dominated by rural population or small towns, that's I'm including small towns, of course, within the rural concept or label. Those areas are conservative, right-leaning, red states, Republican states. That's the difference. The difference is not, well, people in California are all communists. There are a lot of conservatives that live in California, especially Northern California. But compared to their big cities, they have no chance in statewide elections. The same is true for so many other states. You look at Illinois. Illinois is mostly a red state. Why does Illinois always go blue in presidential elections now, though? There's a one-word answer to that. Chicago. That's what it boils down to. In Michigan, it's Detroit versus the rest of the state. In 2016, the rest of the state managed to support Trump enough that it went for Trump. In this last election, it didn't. But Detroit is the main political influence there. Maybe Detroit, as its population decreases, is losing some of that influence, and that's partly why Trump managed to win it before. And I'm not trying to get into the election drama of, was there fraud? Again, just looking at the results for what they are, a state like Michigan is essentially not going to be anything other than the rural areas versus Detroit. That's what determines who wins Michigan. In Ohio, Trump won handedly both in 2020 and 2016. Why? Because there are enough rural areas in Ohio where Trump could win. The small towns and rural areas went drastically for Trump. And Columbus and Cleveland and Cincinnati, Toledo, Athens is a college town, but the population's not very high. They didn't have enough voters to counterbalance the rural populations. Now, there are some differences from election to election, of course. In 2008 and 2012, the rural areas were still dominated by the Republican candidates, but not by as much, and so that allowed Obama to win. So there is a difference in terms of who can rally their base to support the candidate the most. McCain especially didn't really have much of a base that wanted him to win. But Romney, to some extent as well, didn't have much of a chance. But there are variations from election to election. But the main thing that determines whether a state is a blue state, a red state, or a swing state that can go either way is whether those states are dominated by their major cities or not. Whether the major cities have more voters that they turn out compared to the rural areas. That's the difference. It's not, if you look at the overall map and say, well, this state's a red state and this state's a blue state, you're not gonna see that. And honestly, again, I'm not trying to be too critical here, but I think that's what Stardust is doing a lot of the time. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what state you're in. It's still the same concept, primarily of rural versus urban. And separating different states out, different regions, I should say, out into different countries is not going to resolve that. It may change who dominates in that country. So, for example, if the Midwest forms its own country, especially if it excludes the upper Midwest, Republicans or the conservative side is going to have more sway. That country is going to be more conservative or right-leaning compared to, the West Coast or the New England states or even the Mid-Atlantic in that area. But that's not really because the people are totally different there. It's because in the Midwest, for the most part, the rural areas and the small towns dominate. You would probably have to take Chicago and draw a line down from, southern Wisconsin and include Chicago and northern Indiana and Michigan into its own separate state. And that state would probably, or that country would be dominated by the left and probably, let's be honest, Marxist ideology. But that's not because the people who live in the countryside in Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota aren't conservative or as conservative or right-leaning as people who live in other rural areas. It's because those areas would be dominated by Chicago, Detroit, and Milwaukee, right? And Minneapolis. That's why. That's why those are blue states or blue areas. So you're not really solving anything by doing that. It's still going to be, and this is my opinion and this is biased, this is my conclusion as far as why things are the way they are between rural and urban areas. But people who live in the cities are dependent on the government, primarily. People who live in rural areas are less inclined to give up their rights to the state. That's really what a lot of it boils down to. People who live in urban areas, they need the government to have a lot of influence and sway in order to have their government jobs or to live off of the government. I mean, again, you can say that's kind of biased. I realize there are a lot of people that work hard and live in the city, but the government's influence and power is much greater, and that's why those areas vote left. Whereas the rural areas and the small towns, you have people that are more independent-minded who are more likely to say, no, I don't want the government to just take care of me because I don't want to have that influence. I don't want the government to tell me what to do. You have people who are more inclined to choose liberty and freedom over, a nanny state, over the government giving them security but taking away their rights. So that's the major reason, I think, why you see this dichotomy between the leftist havens in the cities, the major cities, and the rural, small town areas of the country voting for Republicans or conservatives or people on the right, candidates on the right. But just separating the country into different regions is not going to change that. It's just going to change who dominates in one area. It's not going to change this huge difference of mindset between the urban areas and the more rural areas. So, again, I kind of disagree that balkanization would solve anything. It would just kind of change, it would drastically change the political landscape in some ways, but you would still have, and maybe at even more of an extreme level in some ways, the rural areas and the small towns not wanting what the cities want, right? So people that live, like I say, in the countryside or the rural areas in Wisconsin, for example, they would be even more dominated by their region compared to, you know, finding some sort of commonality with rural people that live in other parts of the country. But now they're just stuck. Now they're just stuck in their own state that basically makes it to where the cities in that area dominate, and now they're going to have even less influence over their own political system. The same is true, of course, if you look at it from the opposite perspective. If the Midwest, other than the upper Midwest, if Ohio and Indiana and the southern part of Illinois, you know, everything but Chicago, and, you know, Missouri and Iowa, if they all broke off into their own country, then the people that live in Cleveland or Columbus or Indianapolis and those areas, they would probably be, you know, they'd feel more inclined to be pissed off because they would have no chance at winning elections either. So again, I'm not saying that we won't eventually balkanize, but I don't think that's really a solution. I think that even if you would do that, it would just be a matter of, okay, who has power? Is it the cities or is it not the cities? Is it everybody else? You know, who's going to dominate in this structure, in this country, this new country that we've broken off? I don't think it would solve the underlying problem. I think the underlying problem is government dependence in the cities versus more of an independent, individualistic mindset in the smaller towns. I think that's the real dichotomy, the real separating factor. So I don't think breaking up the United States into different regions is going to change that. It would just shift who has power. And probably cause a lot of wars. And again, I'm not saying the United States will or can stay together over the long run. I think in general we're seeing the decline and fall of not just the United States, but all of Western civilization. So I think it's if we keep heading down the path that we go down, you're going to see a lot of this splitting things up into different regions, different sort of autonomous areas as things begin to collapse. But that's going to be more of a result of a collapse. I don't think that it's a solution whatsoever. Like I say, if you just look at a political map of the United States, especially if you look at one that doesn't break things down by county and instead just breaks things down by state, it's like, okay, here are the left-leaning states. Why doesn't California just form its own country? Why doesn't the East Coast just break off? You know, everything north of the Carolina line with Virginia. Why don't they just break off and make their own Marxist leftist country? Why does the Midwest, other than the upper part of the Midwest, just break off? Well, if they did, it would still be a matter of the people that live in the city versus everybody else. It would still be a matter of that being the kind of true division, I think. Yeah, it would change the political landscape drastically, but and conservatives would be able to dominate certain areas. Maybe you could say, well, if you're a leftist, you can move to California, and if you're a conservative, you could move to Indiana then, and be guaranteed almost that your side would dominate, but there would still be a lot of political strife and upheaval. And I think any talk about, or any sort of consideration of balkanizing or splitting up the United States, it has to be made with that awareness that it's not really what region of the country you live in, it's whether the cities or the more rural areas dominate in your state. That's really what actually happens in a lot of these, like the presidential election, for example, these national level or even state level elections. It's a matter of who wins out between the cities and the more rural areas in that given state, rather than where is that state located. So I don't think splitting the country up would really resolve that, honestly. I think it's important to kind of really evaluate that factor. I'm so far behind on these comments, guys. I think this video is really lagging big time, but I will mention the comments that I've gotten. John the Recluse says, they will never see eye to eye. Absolutely. It's just, to some extent you could say that in the past, but I think it's especially bad now, the gap between the left and the right. the narrative is just so different on each side that you can't even have a conversation, in my view, from what I can see. You can't even have a conversation between the average right-winger and the average left-winger today. You just, the average Trump supporter versus the average Biden supporter. You can't even have a conversation anymore and be talking about the same thing. The storyline is just so different on each side. So, I think things are going to get worse as far as that goes. I don't think that that's going to end well. I think there's, like I say, there's the narrative and then there's the counter narrative, and that's basically where it stands between the left and the right today. John the Recluse also says, if Trump loses this election, the right will never trust the electoral process again. Well, that's true, I'm sure, and Trump has lost. I mean, I don't think there's any hope that the Electoral College, they meet today, I think, the Electoral College, so I think it's really just a formality at this point. Some people may disagree with that, but I never thought Trump had a chance at really overturning the results of this election. But there are going to be people on the right that don't trust the process, but what are they going to do? And I think that gets to the next comment. Keegan O'Loughlin, I hope I'm saying that right. What are people that think the election was fraudulent to do after Biden is sworn in? Just suck it up? The Democrats had the whole Russian narrative go for most of Trump's presidency. Well, like I mentioned in my last live stream, there was somebody that commented on one of my political videos that made a really good comment that, I asked in one of my videos, what do you think is going to happen? And he basically said, whenever you see something like this take place, what basically the people that aren't supporting it, assuming there was major fraud, and let's just assume that for the case of what I'm saying here, what people usually do is they do nothing. They know that at this point the system can't really be fixed or saved, and so they basically withdraw into other things. And what, I can't remember what his username was, what his profile name was, but he mentioned that he's been to other communist countries in the past, or countries that had fully embraced communism, and the people there, they just, if they're against what's going on, they just withdraw and they mind their own business. They don't say things. They basically just, they don't participate in the system anymore. I think you also have a lot of people on the right who just, for whatever reason, they believe that the system can still be saved somehow. And they just won't give up in that sense. They'll continue to try to play within the rules, so to speak, hoping to get a different result. You'll probably see some of that as well, but what will they do? I think you're going to see a variety of answers, or a variety of responses from people, but a lot of people are just going to give up. A lot of people, I think, will, if they think that the system's done, then they're going to say, hey, United States is screwed because the left has won. I don't think that's good that they're going to have that response, but unfortunately, conservatives don't want to organize for the most part. They don't want to basically go out and say, all right, if this isn't a fair process, we're going to make the Biden administration a living hell in terms of protesting constantly and throwing up roadblocks and all that kind of stuff. Conservatives don't tend to do that. So what are they going to do? I don't see them doing much of anything. And I agree with the person that responded, like I said on that video, that for the people that see what's going on, regardless of the level of fraud, if they see that conservatives can't win and that the left has basically won, they're just going to withdraw. So I hope you guys that commented, I hope that you can listen to that response. I know it's probably like 20 minutes in between when you made the comment because there's such a lag. And then I also wanted to finish the point that I was making even after I saw the comments. So I apologize for there being such a lag between your comments and me responding to them. Not that I have, a super enlightened response to that anyway. But that's honestly my take on it, guys. Is, like I say, I think Trump lost. I really think that there are enough people that were indoctrinated to vote for Biden just because he was the anti-Trump candidate, that, especially when you add in the mail-in ballots with people that didn't feel motivated to necessarily go out and vote, but they watch a lot of TV and they believe whatever they hear. I think Biden did win this election. A lot of my viewers disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But I think that the system itself is just so far gone that the left is going to continue to make strides. I'm not optimistic about these runoff elections for the Senate in Georgia. If the Senate goes Democrat, we're in trouble because the House obviously already is. The only silver lining is that the Senate is just barely going to be in Democratic control. So maybe there are a few that are still reasonable enough to not go along with the bullshit that the Biden administration will probably try to push through. And the Supreme Court is the other silver lining, because Trump did manage to get a couple of nominees confirmed to the court. So at least they may strike down something if the Biden administration is too radical, or in Congress along with it, in terms of some of the stuff they try to pass. Or even if stuff they do pass into law, maybe the Supreme Court will strike some of it down. But I'm not too optimistic about that either. But yeah, I really think that a lot of what we see is just going to continue to become more extreme. The gap between the right and the left. I don't think, as I mentioned, that Balkanization, it's kind of related to that topic. I don't think that would really improve a whole lot on these issues. I think that the heart of the problem is the government's influence on cities at this point. The heart of the problem is not regional. It's a matter of the government has made so many people dependent on it for their livelihood, and I can understand that. I'm not trying to disparage people that work for the government at all. If my situation was different and I could get a good job with the government, I might consider that. I can understand it, but at the same time, you have a lot of people that just are on welfare and on assistance too, and these people they're content with Marxism. They don't care. They want either handouts or good jobs given to them based on, oh, I'm a woman, or oh, I'm of this race, or oh, I'm LGBTQ or whatever. It's like the cities are havens for people that just want the government to take care of people. And the countryside and the small towns, sometimes they can be pretty extreme too, with this individualistic, suck it up, do everything yourself attitude or stance. But, at the same time, I think that that's closer to being a good system than what, the leftists want and what the cities want as far as their policies go. But that is the dichotomy. No matter where you stand on that, that's what it is. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the rural areas versus the cities. And I don't think that would change just because of splitting the country up. I don't think that would be the solution, honestly. But, like I say, that's my political ramble as far as this video goes. John the Recluse says, Biden is irrelevant. He's just a tool for the party and who supports it. I agree. When I'm talking about Biden, I'm talking about more of his administration as a whole. And I do think that there's a good chance that Biden will not serve his full term. whether something, and this is not meant to be a threat for anybody that's listening to this. It's because of his health and his age. Not saying that always, somebody's going to do something crazy. And I think there's a good chance Biden won't serve his full term because he's already losing his mind. I think that was evident throughout this entire process. Has he completely lost his mind? Probably not. Was he already prone to gaffes and stuff like that before the last few years, before this election process? Yeah. So he was never really all there in some ways. But, are they going to try to replace Biden with Harris based on him getting sick physically or based on his mental incompetence? I think there's a good chance of that. I think there's a good chance that that's been the plan the whole time. And as I mentioned in one of my other videos, maybe I mentioned this. I don't remember whether I said this or not. Kamala Harris represents far more of what the Democratic Party wants to do, because the Democratic Party is all about right now cultural Marxism. It's all basically everybody within the party. The whole idea of the Democratic Party at this point is let's split everybody up based on race, ethnicity, LGBTQ issues, sexuality, gender, religion, and so forth. Let's divide everybody up and get people who are supposedly oppressed in these groups to vote for us. Divide and conquer. Let's label everybody we don't like as deplorable, which is exactly what Hillary Clinton did in 2016, and that backfired, obviously. But that basically means oppressor class. Let's label everybody else as oppressors that we can't get to vote for us. Let's have these Marxist policies of the government just taking everybody's rights away, just, supporting the idea of government dependence, and you as an individual, we're going to erode your rights away. And you can see this with the virus and everything else, although some Republicans are part of the problem with this as well. And let's ultimately just go ahead and, let's say you're a victim, we'll give you free stuff because of your race, because of your gender, and so forth. And let's go ahead and use this as a way to transition Western civilization into communism. That's really what's going on in my view. That may be kind of out there for some of the people that listen to this as well, but that's my opinion on what's going on. That's definitely my take on it. And in order to do that, you don't want to have Biden as your center, as your figurehead, as your centerpiece to all that. But Kamala Harris is multiracial and she's a woman. So she represents far more of what the Democratic Party is trying to do, to use these racial, ethnic, these cultural divisions to justify this oppressor versus oppressed narrative and use that to end individuality with everything that we're seeing, individuality with the political system. Instead, they want to make people dependent on the government. That's the whole goal. And so Kamala Harris, by far, not only is she more radical with her policies in all likelihood, but by far she represents that sort of mentality of basically being against Western values. An old white guy does not galvanize people like Biden, does not galvanize people to support their views, their agenda, like someone like Harris will. And again, I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that just because you're a woman or you're multiracial or whatnot that you're going to get caught up into this. There are some people that are female or are multiracial or are, or black or, not necessarily multiracial but not white, or who are LGBTQ. There are people within those groups that won't fall for this and that actually do want Western values and small government and whatnot. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that more or less everybody that fits into those groups is going to vote Democrat, but that's the goal. That's the Democratic Party's goal, is to split people up in those ways to give free stuff to one group of people while labeling another group of people as bad, and then saying, well, we're going to take away your individual freedoms because you're bad. That's basically the goal of the left and the Democratic Party in the United States. Let me get back to some of the comments here. Keegan O'Laughlin says, thanks, Dan, you answered my question. Yeah, I appreciate that. And he also says the lag is a little annoying, but not too bad. Yeah, I guess it's just my internet is too slow. I really don't like that. I mean, I'm sorry that that's there. But at the same time, I also make these videos for people to watch later, in part, at least. I don't expect them to sit here and watch a video that lasts, 70-some minutes necessarily, but the lag, like I say, I don't know exactly what's causing it unless my internet's just too slow, probably. But I hope that I gave you somewhat of an answer to that question on what people will do who feel like they're alienated from this system after the election. Yeah, they're probably not going to do anything for the most part. A lot of them are just going to withdraw from the system, or they're going to continue on this belief that Trump can win in 2024 or something like that. You'll see people that still want that. I mean, it's just they won't see what's happening and say, wait a second, we need to either organize against this or withdraw and give up on this system. A lot of people will withdraw, but I don't see people really fighting it, honestly. And by fighting, I don't mean that I'm suggesting that people should go out and fight, but in the sense of really organizing politically and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't seem to happen with conservatives. And so it's more likely that they'll just try to pretend like the system still works, or they'll just give up on it and withdraw from what's happening, especially if they feel like Biden cheated to win. I think more of them may wake up and just withdraw from the system completely and focus on their own lives and not focus on this country's well-being anymore, honestly. Looks Max Doc says, if you didn't withdraw 10 plus years ago, it's too late, good luck. Yeah, I think the system has been screwed for at least that long as well, but Trump just sort of highlighted that for people, right? And everything that I mentioned so far in this video about the gap between the right and the left, that's part of people waking up to this slowly over time, one by one. Partly, that the media is lying to them and all that kind of stuff. But, ultimately, I think that's right, 10 plus years ago, I was a teenager or in my early 20s, so I wasn't nearly as aware of what's going on as I am now, in my opinion. But you're right. This has been going on. This has been building up for a long time. Trump was sort of the attempt on the right to counter everything that the left was doing up until this point. And with the 2016 election, I think that a lot of conservatives and right-wingers thought that this could work, that Trump could truly drain the swamp. I never thought that Trump was going to drain the swamp, to be honest. Not because he didn't want to, but because he's not that powerful. He's just one person at the end of the day. And there are so many wealthy and powerful people that are against trying to go back to Western values and go back to a society based on small government and all that. There are so many forces that are against that, yeah, I mean, this has been screwed up for a long time, not just during Trump's administration. So in that sense, I agree. It's like the system has been screwed or on the way to being totally screwed for a long time now. And it's just these recent elections that are showing some people, I think, that that's the case. But again, guys, I've been talking and rambling on for quite some time now. I appreciate the people that have checked this video out, and like I say, I want to get into, well, I haven't said this so far, but I want to get into making some regular standalone videos more often. I posted one recently where I tried to give kind of an overview of the red pill and just generally what it means as a concept, as an idea. And I'll probably do some live videos too in the future. I I'm getting the hang of this more, aside from the lag effect, which I'm not sure what to do about. Let me know if there's any topics that you guys would like to see covered in future videos. I have a lot of ideas, but that doesn't mean that I'm not interested in the ideas that you guys have as well. But just to kind of give a wrap up to this live stream, just to give kind of a wrap up to this, my first point for the video basically was that, and I don't recommend you do this, but if you challenge women and you say, what is it that you as a woman bring to the table in a relationship? Or you just say, well, what do women do for men that should make me interested in a long-term or committed relationship? Looking at all the risks, looking at how men are still measured by how well they provide. What is the point of that? A lot of the time, the most common response you get by far, and again, I don't recommend you do this because you'll get a lot of flack for it, but the most common response I've seen is, how dare you? How dare you expect anything from a woman? Or another variation of that same response, really, what do you bring to the table? And that, like I said, that shows you, that really confirms this sort of understanding that we have within MGTOW, within the men's community, that, well, if you actually had something to offer, you wouldn't respond that way, would you? If you had something to bring to the table, no, like a guy wouldn't say that if he, you know, was asked that question. He'd say, well, I have a home, a stable home, I have a good job, you know, I would be a good provider and protector. Men know what's expected of them. But yet women will just say, I'm offended, basically, that you think that we should offer anything in a relationship. And right away, you know, again, if women really had something to offer other than sex, why would they not say, this is what I do for my man, or this is what I did in a past relationship, and if I got into a relationship again, this is what I'd give. I'd take care of the home, you know, I'd cook for you on a daily basis, or, you know, at least attempt to say that this is what I bring to the table. If women felt like they wanted to even try to bring something to the table, that's how they'd answer that question. They'd try to list the things that they'd give, or they'd say, you know, I'm honest, or I'm loyal, and you know, I care about you, and all this. Yeah, a lot of it would probably be BS. I'm not saying you'd believe them necessarily. Maybe some of them you would. A lot of them you probably shouldn't. But at least they would try to pretend like they had something to bring to the table. But what I noticed when I really wasn't aware of, you know, how much flack I would get for this, I wasn't completely aware of how you probably shouldn't pose this sort of point of view to a woman. But when I first started, you know, kind of digesting men's content and just become red-pilled, so to speak, I would say, hey, you know, why should men be a part of the relationship process, especially a long-term or committed, traditional so-called relationship, when women don't bring anything to the table other than sex, and you can get that outside of a relationship? The most common response was, well, what do you bring to the table? Or, how dare you? How dare you as a man expect anything? So, like I say, guys, that confirms that most women are not willing to bring anything to the table in a relationship. They wouldn't answer that sort of question that way if they were. And so right away, you know, again, I wouldn't really challenge women in that way or pose that question. But when you see most women answering a question in that way of, I don't need to bring anything to the table, what do you bring? You know darn well that they're not willing to do anything in a relationship. You know that any relationship they have with a man is going to be one-sided in their favor. And they only care about what they receive, not what they're willing to give. So, again, that's one way of testing and looking, I think, pretty clearly, pretty conclusively, that most women, if they're answering that question that way, they're not willing to bring anything to the table in the first place, or they wouldn't give that kind of answer. That's just, again, that should be basic observational knowledge, but women think they can get away with this, and a lot of them can, because guys are really thirsty. But ultimately that tells you what you need to know. That to me confirms that most women are not willing to invest in a relationship with a man and are not worth dealing with in that kind of way at that level. Even if you're still interested in relationships, it's like any woman that gives that response is not going to be a good relationship partner for anybody. The second topic that I talked about, of course, was again the widening gap between the left and the right, the narrative on one side versus the sort of anti-narrative or counter-narrative on the other. And again, I see the media primarily as the main culprit for this, the number one culprit for this sort of just completely incompatible view on the left versus the right. And like I say, the leftists just believe whatever the mainstream media tells them, and the conservatives or the people on the right, they see that the media is full of crap, but at the same time, they don't necessarily do their own thinking either. They just go along with whatever's the opposite of what the leftists believe in a lot of cases. And like I say, it's to the point where a lot of people, even if they're not doing an assessment of how much fraud may have taken place in this last election, they just assume Trump got cheated in a lot of ways because the media tells you, oh, there was no fraud. Oh, yeah, Biden won. You have to believe Biden won. That is leading a lot of people into the other camp. And the media is too stupid to figure this out. A lot of leftists can't see this, that, you know, if you wanted people to believe that Biden won legitimately, then you shouldn't have been campaigning against Trump for the last 4 years. You know, of course people are going to think you're lying, and that's a big part of why people are developing these opinions in my view. But I don't think the left and the right can even have a conversation anymore. You know, the typical Trump supporter, your average Trump supporter, and your average Biden supporter, or the person, or the people that voted for Biden, I don't think they can even agree on basic things. I don't think they can have a conversation about what's going on without hostilities, without, just calling each other names in general, because there's such a gap now that I don't think there's any way to bridge that gap, and any way to sort of bridge that sort of gulf between the right and the left. And I think it's just going to continue to get worse. And then the last point, like I said, was on Balkanization, and how I don't really think that's actually viable for the U.S. because the main factor separating which people vote right and which people in the country vote for the left is not really the region you're in. It's whether your state is dominated by urban versus rural areas. And so I don't think it boils down to anything that's useful in terms of separating the country out. Like, that's not going to resolve anything, because it's just, you're going to have the same divisions that you have now. It's just who's going to dominate each region might change, but it's still going to be the urban areas versus the countryside. New York State, for example. Well, let's make New York State part of, the eastern seaboard that's dominated by the left, that's dominated by the Democratic Party or whatnot. Okay, but then everybody in New York State who's not in New York City basically votes conservative already. Or they vote, against what New York City votes. So again, you would end up basically creating city-states this way, and one group would still dominate over the other, and you'd still have this urban versus rural inability to work together type of thing going on, because that's the main division. It's not what region you live in, it's whether your state is dominated by the urban areas or the rural areas. And I don't think breaking up the country would really do anything to address that issue. In fact, it might make it worse, like I say, because then one particular area is dominated by one side versus the other so much that it alienates more people in that region. So I don't think that would work very well. I don't think that would be a solution. So, a couple comments here still. A couple more comments, I should say. Elihu, the young MGTOW. Is this the end? No, it's the beginning of the end. I don't know what you're asking that in context with, but there's a lot more to the story that's going to go on, I think. But depending on what you mean by asking that question, it could be the beginning of the end if you're talking about our overall political situation or just where things stand in the West. Things are not at the end yet, if that's what you're asking, but I think things are going to get worse before we reach the end. John the Recluse, Trump's election was a break in the leftist march, but as an outsider, he was never welcome, even by the Republican elite. That's absolutely true. It's 100% true. Yeah. Basically, I do agree that I don't think Trump was part of their plan whatsoever, but the best that he did was slow down what was going on, and maybe he galvanized the left to be even more radical, to be honest. I was going to make a video while Trump was still president, and he still is for the next month, I guess, about how the left loves Trump. And of course, they don't really, but the idea that I was going to use in that is, and I may still make this video concerning, history, concerning this presidency, the left used Trump as a distraction while they continued to work their magic. The overall trend of our society is still going down the leftist crap hole, to be honest. Trump didn't change that even while he was president. But this gave time, while conservatives were so focused on defending Trump, it gave the leftists time to continue to indoctrinate people, to bring in people, illegal immigrants, and to, increase welfare for them, to basically cause a lot more trouble and to continue to unravel our society while conservatives are focused on, well, Trump's president, so maybe something good will happen. Whereas if Bernie Sanders, for example, had gotten elected in 2016, it may have made things a lot worse. The policies we see now that he would have advocated for would have been a lot worse. But conservatives would have been able to see what was going on to some extent. They wouldn't have had this sort of distraction of, well, we need to defend Trump. Maybe there was an outside chance that conservatives would have organized against the Democratic Party and against the left better than what they have. But just, working within the system and thinking that Trump was going to change things, I think distracted a lot of conservatives into supporting Trump, having that be their sole focus, or their main focus at least, while the left continued to basically indoctrinate people in schools, use the media to think that, the leftist message is so much better than Trump because Trump's bad. It kind of allowed them to organize and galvanize better with Trump in office. And so in some ways, the left loved being able to use Trump as a way to distract conservatives and to basically organize their own base. I hope that made some sense, but I thought a lot about that. I don't know that Trump did slow the decline and fall of this society, to be honest. I don't know that in the end it might have actually made things worse. Maybe not. Maybe the Supreme Court justices that he appointed will make it better. Will slow things down later on as they strike down some of these leftist Marxist policies. But that's an if, and I don't know how it'll take place. I don't know what the court will do in the future, and neither do most people, I don't think. So, I don't know whether it helped us or not, Trump's presidency, in terms of hanging on, in terms of, well, we obviously didn't reverse much. We didn't get rid of Obamacare or anything like that. The wall's not really built or anything. It's just, what did we accomplish? What did Trump accomplish? So I think I've gone on and on about that enough, but yeah, I think that Trump was never going to accomplish a whole lot. I think that he was a way to distract conservatives so that they focused on him instead, defending him, all the impeachment stuff. I mean, there is no way that Trump was going to be convicted when you need 2/3 of the Senate to convict someone who has been impeached, right? But yet they went through this whole song and dance the Democratic Party did anyway. Do you think they really thought they really believed that somehow enough Republicans were going to vote to convict Trump and get him out of office? They knew that wasn't going to work. The whole thing was to distract people and indoctrinate people into hating Trump and to being against Trump and to basically waste the conservatives who supported Trump, waste their time and draw their attention away from overall what was going on in this country. In my opinion, that's a big part of what went on. The Pelosi and all them, they knew that they weren't going to get Trump out of office, but they knew they could use that to rally their base and to distract conservatives. And I think that's what a lot of that was really about. Maybe I have a weird view on that, but that's kind of my interpretation of those events. So for whatever that's worth, I agree with you completely. I think Trump's election was a break in the leftist march, but as an outsider, he was never welcome, even by the Republican elite. And you see a lot of these Republicans now, like in my state of Ohio, DeWine, who's all about forcing people to wear masks, having a curfew after a certain time period. You know, it's all about, you know, we don't care about people's freedoms. We want to manipulate people into thinking a certain way so that we can increase the power of government. I mean, even with Republicans, like in my state, that seems to be the case. So the Republican elite, I know that was a little off topic, but the Republican elite they're not much different than the Democrats as far as that goes. The only small government conservatives, you might have a few Republicans and some libertarians, but most of them are just controlled opposition, as some people say. I think that's what most of them are anymore. They pretend to offer something different, and then they do similar stuff as the Democrats do. They're all part of the same group in some ways. Toshinben says, sex bots. There doesn't seem to have been much of an update on them recently. Yeah, my kind of view on the sex bots is that, you know, I may be wrong about this, but most men are not going to see that as a substitute for women. Guys that are kind of aware of how their biology is being manipulated against them, you know, red pill men basically, they may very well decide that they want to try sex bots and all that, but I'm not really convinced that they're going to replace women and whatnot. A lot of guys are thirsty, and they're thirsty for only one thing, and I don't know that sex bots are going to replace that. I just, no matter how realistic they are, a man's going to know, well, I'm not really with a real woman. It may sort of feel real, but it's still not the same thing. So, you know, for the guys that want to use that as an alternative, I'm not going to judge you one way or the other. I'm not going to say that's wrong or bad. It's better than getting a woman pregnant or committing to a long-term relationship with a woman. But I don't have too much that I can say about the sex bots other than I'm not really convinced that a lot of men are going to think that they're a substitute for women. I think for the most part, I will say this, and maybe you'll disagree with me, and that's okay. I think men are better off getting control over their biology. I think men are better off just not needing women sexually than they are going to the sex bots. Maybe that's sort of a conservative view on that. I don't know, but I don't. like I say, for the guys that really want that companionship, but they know that they can't be with a real woman and they know that this is a substitute, then I don't see anything, that might be a good choice for them to get a sex bot. But most men are going to either want the real thing or they're going to gain control over their biology so that it doesn't matter a whole lot anymore. So that's kind of my opinion on the sex bots. I don't think that they're going to become as big of a thing as some other MGTOWs think. That's just my personal opinion on it. So I guess, I've been rambling on for over an hour and a half now. So I guess that's pretty much where I'm going to stop this video. Like I say, I really want to focus a lot on doing some standalone videos. Then one of the next videos that I'm going to do, I'm probably going to post to BitChute and just do a sort of preview video on YouTube. It's actually something that I recorded a long time ago, probably like a year or more ago at this point. But it's probably a little bit too juicy of a topic to talk about on YouTube. I'm kind of hesitant to put the video out at all, but it's related to some of the stuff that I've talked about here with politics and the sort of conservative versus leftist paradigm that we see, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten more extreme. As I've said in this video, the difference between the right and the left today. But I'm going to talk about sort of it's an attempt to expand on something that Monday Blue, if anybody remembers his channel, talked about. And I actually recorded this video when his channel was still up, but nonetheless, or he still had videos. I think his channel still exists on YouTube, but it doesn't have videos anymore. I think he's pretty much moved on from YouTube and whatnot at this point. But I want to talk about sort of the whole losing to cowards topic in terms of how conservatives will sit there and they'll make fun of leftists, but then they won't organize and do that kind of stuff. Do similar stuff to what the left is doing because they see it as beneath them and whatnot. Of course, like I say, I don't think that they're ever going to organize in the same way that the left does, but I want to talk about that on BitChute because I think if I go into too much detail on YouTube, it's just like they may not appreciate me talking about what the left does and where I think that sort of line is ethically between what you can do and not do to organize. I'm going to probably put that video on BitChute. So I guess there's that coming up whenever I decide to post that. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've got going on, guys. I want to expand on where I talked about the red pill as a general concept in my last video. I'll probably make some videos on that shortly too. But like I say, I like doing these live streams as well, especially if I haven't made a video for a while. Usually I have some ideas that I've been considering, but I've just never made a video about it, so I go on a ramble instead.